the task of the enlightened, not only to ascend to learning and to see the good, but to be willing to descend again to those prisoners and to share their troubles and their honors, whether they are worth having or not. And this they must do, even with the prospect of death. They shall give of their help to one another, wherever each class is able to help the community.
Plato wrote this remarkable story thousands of years ago. And you got a picture of it, but here's just a reminder, right? Okay, we have a dark cave filled with prisoners. They were born in this cave. They have been shackled in this cave. They don't know any other world. They have been chained so that they are forced to look at the wall in front of them. They don't know what's going on behind them. But there's a large fire behind them with people carrying objects, and these objects are casting shadows on the wall that the prisoners can see. That's the only way they look. It's the only thing they can see are these shadows that appear on the wall. What Plato is trying to tell us with this story, well, is a number of things. But the first is that we are all living in ignorance. We have all been born into a particular society at a particular historical time and place with particular rules and customs and stories about what all this is and how all this works, right? Plato wants to say, in some sense, we are all like the prisoners in this cave. We don't ultimately know what the truth is, how the world actually works, unless we can escape from our closed-mindedness, our conditioning, our conditioned understanding of the world. This is what philosophy is all about, and this is what philosophy can do for us, Plato thinks. Philosophy allows you to make the ascent out of the darkness of ignorance into the light of truth and understanding. Okay? And so what Plato says in this allegory is that we are all like the prisoners of this cave. We all live in a kind of world. We think we know what's going on and how things work. But if we don't actually interrogate what we've been told, if we don't interrogate the stories people tell us, the views they offer us, if we don't actually reflect, for example, on the education that we've received, the news we're consuming, the images that we allow to pass before our eyes, we're going to stay like ignorant prisoners. That's the moral of this story. Okay? Now, Plato is also saying a lot else with this. But let's start kind of by just laying out the symbols. What is the cave? Well, Plato has a particular metaphysical view of how the world works, but let's start simple. The cave is the world or our lives without philosophy, without reflection, without actually thinking about things. Okay? If that's the cave, who do you think the cave dwellers are? The prisoners. Kind of already given it away. Exactly. It's all of us. Every single one of us are, to more or lesser a degree, a prisoner. A prisoner in our own darkness and ignorance. Okay? So basically, everyone. Now, who do you think the escapee is? The escaped prisoner? The philosopher, right? But you don't need to be somebody who works at a university to be a philosopher. Okay? You don't need to be someone with a fancy degree. What is a philosopher? Well, it's someone who seeks after the truth. You can do that as a member of any race or socioeconomic class, okay? You don't have to go through all of this fancy schmancy education. You don't have to have had a certain past, okay? As long as you love the truth and you pursue it, you're honestly trying to understand it all, you're being a philosopher, okay? In the cave in which we all reside, we might reside in different kinds of caves. Maybe one of you is ideologically possessed by some or other political ideology. Maybe one of you, we might say, is brainwashed by some sort of cultic religion. Maybe one of you is just, taken with all of the news stories that come across your feed, and you just believe them wholeheartedly, and you don't really dig into them. That might describe any one of us. And it does. But in this cave, in this kind of life we are living, without honestly questioning and digging into things, without honestly researching and investigating, in this cave, illusions abound. We don't have a view of the truth. We don't actually understand what's going on. The knowledge we think we have isn't actually knowledge at all. It's just a view of the shadows that we see passing on the wall in front of us. It's not actually what's going on. It's not actually real truth. In order to acquire a true knowledge and understanding, we need to engage in philosophy and use our reasoning capacities to work out things, to think about things, to interrogate them, to question them. Now, in the background, what Plato is also trying to say here is that the senses that you have, you see the world through your eyes, you smell it through your nose, you taste it through your mouth, you feel it through these receptors in your hands. Those senses don't give you a complete picture of what's actually going on. And we know that the senses can be deceptive. Have you ever heard something that wasn't actually there? You thought somebody was breaking into your dorm room? Nope, nobody was. You ever feel a vibration in your phone in your pocket, but you didn't get a notification? Yep. So what Plato is also trying to say with this is that we should privilege reasoning over just trusting what the senses are giving us. Okay? Because he also thinks the cave is representative of the world we live in by just trusting our eyes and ears and nose and mouth. But the world is bigger than that. And it's more complicated than that. Okay? So we have to use these capacities for reasoning and reflection to actually get to the bottom of things. Now, this is one of the messages that Plato is offering us. But he offers us much more, or at least we could provide a bunch of interpretations of what Plato is trying to get at with this allegory. And to lay those out, I need to teach you a little bit of history. When Plato was writing his philosophy, the city of Athens had engaged in the Peloponnesian War, with other Greek city-states. Now, unfortunately for the Athenians, they lost that war to the Spartans. And what happened as a result from that? Well, the Spartans came in and they replaced basically everyone in power. And we had what we call the rule of the 30 tyrants. And the Athenians had to deal with violence and oppression, and they basically had the rule over their city taken from them. Okay? Well, one of the things that Plato is trying to express in this story is political. The Athenians lost the Peloponnesian War in part due to what Plato thought was a bad way of politically organizing the city, democracy. Plato was against democracy, okay? Democracy and political corruption and poor political rule caused them to lose the war. And that didn't make Plato very happy. He imagined a very different political structure and way of, well, dividing power, which he lays out in the Republic. We could also divine an educational interpretation from this allegory. What is that? Well, that Plato thought education wasn't being done right in his day and age. See, at this time, most of the people who got educated were those who were in the noble class, okay, and those who were men. It was expected that these noblemen, after receiving a long education, would enter politics themselves and help rule the city and help determine what the laws and court rulings would be. But Plato noticed that around this time, there was the emergence of this group of people that we might call the sophists, who were going around from city to city, and they were telling these young aristocratic men, hey, if you give me money, I'll teach you how to persuade people to do things or believe things using words. This is what we call rhetoric. Plato thought, no, we shouldn't hand our education over to these sophists. Okay? They're ruining the education of the young men. Why? Well, they're teaching the young men how to persuade people of things using fancy language and terms. But the sophists aren't teaching the young men the truth of the world. They're just teaching them how to manipulate people. That shouldn't be the basis of any educational system, Plato thought. So he thought education was messed up during his day and it needed to change. But Plato also had a more personal reason for writing this allegory. This is what I like to call the indictment interpretation. If you know anything about philosophy or about Plato, you may have heard of this guy called Socrates. Anybody heard of this guy called Socrates? Socrates was one of these old dudes who would go around the city trying to figure out if people knew things, testing their virtue, testing their knowledge. He himself wanted to know how the world worked. And just through his questioning and answering, he ended up acquiring a group of young men, students, who followed him around, who thought he was all that, who thought he was cool. Plato was one of them. Well, does anybody know what happened to Socrates? He is dead, yeah.
Was he killed?
Yes. He was sentenced to death. Why was he sentenced to death? Well, the political rulers of the time didn't like that he was going around and getting people to question things and getting people to question the current political rule and getting people to question perhaps the founding myths and stories on which Greek society was based. And so they brought Socrates, Plato's mentor, before the court, and they found him guilty of charges of impiety and of corrupting the youth. And they sentenced him to death. Plato never got over this. Perhaps the man, his teacher, whom he loved most in his life, was killed as a result of doing philosophy, of getting people to question things, prompting people to investigate and research and use those reasoning capacities to come to a conclusion themselves. So, Plato undoubtedly came to some kind of conclusion that Athens was corrupt. Okay? It was lacking wisdom. They killed his mentor unfairly and unjustly just for trying to do philosophy. Plato didn't think Socrates had corrupted the young wealthy men of the city. He didn't think Socrates was doing anything wrong, but he was sentenced to death anyway. Plato would have viewed this sentencing to death of his mentor as a grave sin, a grave error. He may have even viewed it as the city killing its best hope and making society better, at educating people. I'll lay out just two more interpretations. We'll call the penultimate one the epistemic interpretation. Has anybody ever heard of epistemology? This comes from another Greek word. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. What is knowledge? How do we acquire knowledge? How can we say whether or not we have knowledge? Well, what Plato is also trying to express in this allegory is that true knowledge and understanding of the world requires reason, philosophy, again, reflection, investigating and trying to get to the bottom of things using these cognitive capacities that we have. It requires the philosophical way of life. And finally, for one more interpretation, and this is not exhaustively capture what Plato is trying to get at, but it's a good start. We might say, for lack of a better way to phrase this, brainwashing is everywhere. Whether it is the kind of upbringing or education you had, what your parents told you, what society tells you, what the senators and representatives of the United States tell you, what the news and media tell you. There are forces constantly trying to get you to believe certain things. People have a vested interest in you thinking and behaving in certain ways. And they're trying to get you to think and behave in those ways. We all do this. Why am I standing up here talking to you about all this? Well, I'm trying to change the way you think, and I'm using my words to do that. Everybody does this, but we don't reflect on it often enough. Parenting, education, media, advertising, government. If these are not wielded appropriately, they can become mechanisms for conditioning and brainwashing. And people can become ideologically possessed, have the false views. Okay? This is something we also need to realize Plato is saying in this story. So what is the philosophical way of life? Well, It's all about questioning. Questioning what you are told. Questioning what you see. Questioning what people tell you, what your parents say is right, what the government says is right, what your philosophy professor says is right. Okay? If you don't make the honest effort to reflect on what you are consuming and work it out to find the truth, you're just like the cave dwellers. You're living in ignorance. You can't have any certainty that what you actually know, what's going on, is what's actually going on. Make sense? So, Plato says, to varying degrees, we're all trapped in these caves. All right? Everybody is stuck in one or more caves. Well, from this, we could think about, what are we supposed to do about that? Hopefully I have relayed to you now that you are in a cave. You're in a cave, and you're in a cave, and I'm in a cave. Okay, great. We all know we are in ignorance. We all know there are things that we don't know. We all know we could be doing a better job about figuring out how the world actually works, right? Let's say there are three basic responses that you could have to learning that you are in a cave, to learning that you are ignorant, to learning that you have been propagandized or conditioned into a kind of way of thinking and a way of life. One response you could have to learning that you are in a cave is to become an activist, what I call an activist. Once you realize that you're ignorant, that there are things that you don't know, that there are external forces trying to influence how you think and behave, you might think, well, shit, I gotta wake other people up and change the system because this sucks and this is bad, right? This is what I call being an activist. You can try to change the external environment so that maybe people end up less in caves, so that you help escort people out of caves, so that maybe this won't happen to children like it happened to you, so on and so forth. That's one response you could have. Another response is what I call being an individualist. If the activist is trying to change the world, trying to change the system, the individualist might think, well, look, I can't change the entire news and media industry in Western society that's brainwashing people. But what I could do is I could change myself to learn how to better deal with it all. Working on what is internal rather than what is external. You could transform yourself to better deal with the cave and the sufferings of life, rather than trying to change the world like the activist does. But there is a third option. If the activist tries to change what is external, the individualist tries to change what is internal, you could take a different path. What I call becoming a relinquishist. Not a real word, but it's a word today. You could give up your preference and attachment to it all. You could just let go and learn to accept everything as it is. Go with the flow. Not try to change everything, but just, I'm just going with the flow, man. In the history of Christianity, for example, there were groups who thought and acted like this, accepted the will of God. They were called quietists. So this kind of philosophy of life we could call quietism. But what are the takeaways here? And what are we doing in this class? Well, the takeaways are this. You're living in ignorance. I'm living in ignorance. Everybody out there is living in ignorance. This is what you know, okay? And what I know. This is what there is to know, okay? There are magnitudes more of those things that we do not know than we do know and understand. There is a distinction between what reality is actually like and what our perceptions of reality are. It's unavoidable, but you have been conditioned into a certain way of thinking and acting due to your upbringing, where you went to school, your parents' values, the government we have, all that stuff. But unless we actually question those things, unless we actually reflect on them and interrogate them, we're just going to be thinking and living as we always have. That seems to be good enough for a lot of people, right? They're just going about their daily lives. They're not questioning anything. They don't really care to try to get to the bottom of most things because they have shit to do, right? They have responsibilities and kids and whatever else. But knowledge is power. And critical thinking, if strengthened, can be immensely useful to you. And it can help you reach your goals. So, seek after the truth. Don't just accept what you've been told or what I tell you or what everyone out there tells you about how you're supposed to live or what's right and wrong. Seek out the truth. This is not a safe way of life. This is something you must keep in mind. What happened in the story to the prisoner who escaped? Well, when he went back down into the cave and everything was still dark to him because he was used to the light of day, he was used to the light of real knowledge, he couldn't play the games in the cave anymore, right? And everybody laughed at him. And they thought that he had gone completely astray and he had made himself stupid. There are all kinds of games that we play in this society in which we live. Rewards and punishments for not playing the game appropriately. So if you're going to be a seeker of truth, be very careful when talking to other cave dwellers. Do people like having the truth revealed to them? Or do they lash out and get angry about it? Do they get defensive? The overall moral of the story is that if we want to really know how the world works, if we want to be virtuous and wise and live better lives, we need to make that conscious effort to question things and seek the truth. The prisoner in the cave does not have the orientation or perspective to understand their situation at all. But now you do. Now you understand a little bit better your situation. So what are you going to do about it? Think on that. All right. That's all I got for you. I will see you all on Wednesday. Make sure to do those readings before you come to class, all right?